All right. So welcome. We are here doing the QPI sibling assessment training. My name is Shanika Royals and I'm your trainer for today. Our objectives for today, we are going to understand the requirements and expectations of the sibling placement assessment and best practices and goals, identify the requirements for improved planful transitions, including initial placements into out-of-home care, transitions within the child welfare system, and exiting the child welfare system, and understand the placement change assessment and best practices and goals. Our agenda for today, we're going to go over the QPI key points. We'll go over considerations for siblings in out-of-home care, sibling placement assessment process and tools, skills practice exercises, considerations for planful transitions, because we know that if we make concerted efforts to make transition plans happen, that they tend to be easier. They tend to minimize the trauma as it results from changing placements or maybe even coming into care initially. And then we'll review the placement transition plan tool and then the skills practice exercises. All right, sibling assessment and planful transitions. So first we'll start talking about the sibling assessment. It is on the PowerPoint slide, so we'll go over it together, but you can also follow along inside of your guidebook if you'd like. So the core principles of QPI, consistent, excellent parenting and meaningful relationships are the most important services we can provide to children and youth in foster care. So we know that that our children, our youth that are in foster care, their bonds to their families, their bonds to their siblings. Those are some of the things that mean the most to our children in foster care. And it is no secret that when children do enter care, at various points, they may lose contact with people, or they may have strained relationship with people because they're separated from them. Our focus here, not only at Kids Central, but with the state of Florida, is we want to make sure that children continue having those relationships while they are involved in the foster care system. The next principle is research on child, youth, and brain development and the effects of trauma not only demonstrates the importance of parenting and positive relationships, but also provides guidance on how best to support them. Agency policy and practice should be informed by research. So we know we are really focused on being trauma informed, understanding how the impact of trauma not only affects the parents or the family, but it affects the way that a child grows and develops. So there's a lot of research to support that. And so it is important that as we're working in the child welfare system, that we remain trauma informed and we approach things and we approach children in situations, even their behaviors that they might have, from a trauma informed lens, understanding that what you might be seeing is a result of or the reaction to trauma as opposed to just negative behaviors. And the individuals most affected by policies and practices are in the best position to design and implement change so that systems ensure excellent parenting and meaningful relationships for children who enter their care. We want to make sure that everything that we do is not only trauma informed, but it is also person centered, right? We want to make sure that everything that we do, we don't have cookie cutter families, we don't have cookie cutter ways that we do things or ways that we engage people. We want to make sure that everyone who is involved is able to receive the best care that's tailored to their needs. And so QPI research on sibling placement and relationships. Support for placing siblings together derive from three following principles. Sibling relationships are important emotional connections, right? For most of us, I have a sibling. For most of us, that sibling relationship that you have is the relationship that you know, with the person that you are going to know the longest time. If you're an older sibling, you've known your younger siblings their entire life. If you're a younger sibling like myself, then you have known your older siblings your entire life. Those are the relationships that you are going to have when your parents have gone on, and hopefully you guys are still together. You still have that camaraderie. You still have that commonality. You have those shared memories and experiences. And sibling relationships are valued. They're generally positive and often protective. For the most part, that's how sibling relationships are. Of course, we know and understand that siblings are different, and that the dynamics of sibling groups is often different with every family. But for the most part, they are very positive and they're protective. If you're an older sibling, it is very likely that you are quite protective of your younger siblings. And if you're a younger sibling, you might be fiercely protective of your older sibling. Like only you can harass and annoy your older sibling. That's how I feel about my big brother. I can annoy him until the cows come home, but I don't like when anybody else messes with him. And direct evidence of studies of siblings in out-of-home care supports the importance of sibling relationships. There's evidence to support that the sibling relationship is very important, not only for development, but also for stability purposes for our children in care. If you can imagine, we have children who are coming into care, they're being removed from their families, from their homes, from their neighborhoods, everything that they know, and they're being put into a very strange environment, into a strange home with new caregivers, and that's the one person they have. So those relationships are incredibly important when they come into care. And if they are separated, we as the agency have a duty and responsibility to ensure that we are maintaining those bonds to try to help the children continue to have that sibling relationship. So consider your life experience regarding your own siblings or others in your life who have siblings. How important is the sibling relationship? So I'll ask you guys, how important is your sibling relationship for those of you that have siblings? And please take yourselves off of mute because I cannot see the chat. I don't know where it's at right now.
Okay, I'll go.
Well, I love my brother, but yeah, I don't like him very much.
Yeah, that happens. I feel the same way, honestly. He's my older brother and I love him dearly and very fiercely, but like, we're 6 years apart and like, we're not that cool. Sometimes we are. Thank you for sharing. Sabella, you said that you were getting ready to speak?
I was trying to break the silence.
Oh, thank you, I appreciate it.
Yes, I have an older brother as well, and growing up we didn't get along too much, but as adults I don't know what I would do without him. And my mother has passed away, so like you said, once your parents pass on, then you have that common person that remembers that person, so it's very important. I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if, when you're growing up, you're not super close to them, as you get older and that age gap starts to close a little bit, that the relationship starts to change a little bit. It's a little weird. Then Donnell says, I'm only close with one of 4 siblings. Wow. So you got 4 siblings. Are they older? Or are they younger?
I'm the middle one. I have 2 older and 2 younger, and I'm only close with my second oldest sibling.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's so weird how it works. Like you just kind of gravitate to one person, right?
And she was the one that I really didn't get along with either when I was a kid. Like we used to fight like cats and dogs. We're 2 years apart, but I would be missing a huge part of just me and my family if she was not involved with me and my family. So
that's awesome. Thank you for sharing. And Jenny says, my brother is 9 months younger than I am. I've always been very protective of him. Wow, 9 months. Huh, I can do that. Personality wise, wouldn't be someone I would choose to have in my life, but I love him fiercely. That's exactly how I feel about my brother. I love him. I have good times with him now, but like when I see him, it's good times, and then I go home and everything's good, right? And a lot of people are like that. But imagine if the situation had changed and maybe you guys were removed, right? If you were in foster care, how would that look differently for you? How would that feel, right? A lot of our kids, when they come into care, they have those same feelings. Maybe they aren't necessarily that cool with a particular sibling, or maybe they're only close with one sibling. But then when they come into care, it's a different sort of shift. You might see some of those behaviors where they're tired of each other and they don't really want to be bothered, but at the same time, that's all they have, right? So if they come into care and they are not placed together, what are some of the effects that have on their bond or on them developing? Okay, so we'll dig into some of that. Thank you. Layra, if you've already done it, you can go ahead and log off. Have a good one. All right, so the Florida Sibling Placement Assessment Guide. So this was sent to you. I will go over it. It's actually going to be on the slide, so you don't actually need to bring this up unless you just want to, and that's perfectly fine. But it's going to be on the next couple of slides as well. The purpose of this guide is promote family connections and reduce additional trauma and harm to children in out-of-home care by recognizing the significant need to prioritize sibling relationships. The definition of sibling expands beyond biology and is centered on the nature of the relationship between children. So when we're talking about siblings, we know in child welfare, we have a term that's called fictive kin, right? So just because it is not necessarily a blood-related relative does not necessarily mean that that person does not recognize another individual, another child as their siblings. Sometimes they may have half siblings or step siblings, and that's a sibling to them, right? So we have to take into consideration those things as well when we are talking about our children in care. And the importance of sibling relationships must be balanced with ensuring that children and youth have secure, nurturing, and stable attachments to caregivers. So when they are in their out-of-home placements, whether it is with a relative, non-relative, or licensed care, making sure that the child feels a connection or has a caring, nurturing bond with that caregiver is also really important for stability purposes. Making sure that they are able to maintain their placement and then also grow to trust and engage and attach with other individuals, okay? So the Florida Placement Assessment Guide, we'll cover that in the next couple slides. The Sibling Placement Assessment Guide is intended to be used at any point a child enters out-of-home care and has a sibling as defined by that statute and as a child's case proceeds. So anytime you have children that come into care, whether or not they come from CTS, in out-of-home care, whether or not perhaps they were in a non-judicial case that now has turned judicial, or they were in a direct file, like an in-home judicial case that is now out of home. Anytime that child comes into out-of-home care, we'll need to do the sibling placement assessment in order to make sure that we are providing the best care and providing them with the best environment possible, okay? So we're gonna go over the guide. Again, it's on our next couple of slides, but you can follow along, okay? So what is the importance of prioritizing sibling relationships? Important emotional connections. Again, those are the longest relationships, right, that you might have. Especially significant to the emotional and social development of a child who is in out-of-home care. We know that trauma really affects the way that the child is growing and develops, right? Their development, their emotional, their social development can be permanently altered by the trauma that they endure by coming into care. Honestly, just by being involved in the child welfare system is a traumatic event. It is traumatic for everyone that is involved. And so we know that and we understand that, and there's research to support that trauma actually changes the way that one's brain starts to develop, okay? They share life experiences that create and solidify that sibling bond. So we as a child welfare professionals need to make a concerted effort to maintain the family connection. It is crucial that we do that. We recognize that science has recognized that, the feds recognize that in our CFSRs. It's important that they maintain a connection to not only their siblings, but also other persons who might be involved in their lives prior to coming into care. And it provides a sense of family identity and comfort, right? It may ease their adjustment to losses, transition to living in out-of-home care, and the transition to adulthood. It could be a source of support that must be preserved unless contraindicated for concrete and specific safety or well-being reasons. Emotional ties between siblings can be maintained when siblings are placed together and when they live in separate households. So we know that children, when they come in out of home care, even though our placement team is amazing and they do all that they can to put siblings inside of mutual foster homes, sometimes the children that come in have complex placement needs. So they can't always be placed together, or there might not be an availability of homes that can take large sibling groups. So sometimes that might require for them to be separated temporarily. But we, as the Child Welfare Agency, can make sure that we're still maintaining those bonds. There's various different things, including ongoing sibling contact, that we can do and put in place that will help to maintain those sibling bonds they have, even if they have to live in separate foster homes. And child welfare professionals must work together to prioritize sibling relationships. It's pretty much what we just said, right? We have to have that sibling visitation plan. We have to have a plan in place so that we know what or how we are going to maintain the siblings bond that they have with one another. And this starts on page 3 in your guide. What efforts should be made to place siblings together? So we know that whenever possible, we should make all the efforts to place siblings together, right? Whenever it's possible, whenever it's feasible, unless there's very clear and specific reasonings as to why those mutual placements, placing children in the same home, is not in the best interest of one or more of those children, right? Efforts to place children has to be our priority, right? It has to be an urgent priority that we do with intention. And even though they may initially be separated, we need to make ongoing efforts to ensure that we eventually find a placement where they can come back together and have a mutual foster home. And then, if at all possible, we need to make sure that we are not placing siblings inside of group homes or in like the shelter homes while they're waiting for a placement. So if we have them separated and we have one sibling here in a shelter and another sibling in another group setting, even placing them together is better than having them separated, right? It's not necessarily something that we want to do if we can help it. So we need to pay close attention to that. So what effort should we make to place siblings together? So we have to consider the following efforts. Identify appropriate relatives. That is where our family finding is going to come in real heavy. Our family finding efforts to locate various relatives, even if it doesn't yield a relative placement, maybe a non-relative placement, so we can get children who are placed together in mutual foster homes, barring any safety issues. Have the youth been consulted about adults in their lives who they trust? Youth, school-age children, they'll tell you about any relatives or non-relatives that their parents are friends with, or that they've spent a significant amount of time. If they have an Aunt Mary who's not really an Aunt Mary and is more like a godmother, you ask them about it while we're doing those private interviews with our kids and we're talking to them during our home visit. We can get that information from our kids. So if we're getting that information, we can reach out to those various different persons and try to get the background screen and see whether or not they are a viable resource for placement. And then any licensed foster home that have committed to taking sibling groups. So we have certain foster homes that are open to sibling groups. Some are already hold sibling groups. And so asking them if they would be open to taking yet another sibling group, or taking the sibling, maybe there's 2 siblings placed inside of that foster home, asking them, hey, would you be interested in housing the other child or the other sibling that's in a separate foster home, so that they can all be together and have that mutual placement. And then also, as a case manager, identifying which services and supports are needed to support the siblings placement, sometimes based on just various different reasons, behaviors, unique needs. The child might be at risk of disrupting that placement. What can we do as the case managers the child's case manager to make sure that we're providing services that can help stabilize that placement. And sometimes one child's behaviors or one child's needs actually jeopardizes the other child's needs and the other child's placement stability, which of course we'll cover soon. Okay. So what are the local challenges to placing siblings together? I need your help. I need you guys to tell me, what are some of the local challenges that we face in regards to placing siblings together? And what do you think needs to happen locally? Now, we don't have a magic wand, okay? And we know that we need some more foster homes, and we are always willing to accept them, but what are some of the things that you guys feel would be beneficial? Oh, I have some stuff going on in my chat. Let's see. Oh, I hear somebody. Go ahead and talk. I don't know where I'm hearing from. Oh, is that you, Carla?
Getting families to actually accept the children.
Yes. Yeah, that is an issue. You're talking about like a sibling to a child
Yeah.
in their home. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it has to do with our approach as well. When we're asking them about taking on another child. Thank you. Deanna, you had something?
Well, I was going to say that, you know, a lot of these kids come with mental health issues. So I think the challenge is that, you know, with their trauma and their mental health, putting them together makes it very difficult for these foster parents. So there's not enough mental health needs being met, you know, to address it and keeping these children together.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it has to do with, and we are making efforts to have them trained. A lot of them are doing TBRI, right, Carla? And they are learning about trauma and learning the effects of trauma and what it looks like in their attachment styles. So I think getting more education and getting them better trained will probably potentially help with some of that, hopefully. That is the hope and the goal. Anyone else have any ideas? What have you experienced on your cases? What local challenges?
Sometimes if one of the siblings are a teenager, the families are not willing to take in a teenager. They're more likely to take in the younger children.
Yeah, we like cute and cuddly, right? And that's true. And that is definitely something, especially if that teen has had some ongoing issues, or maybe has had some, you know, maybe behavioral issues in the past, or maybe has some mental health issues, those challenges. And I think a lot of it is also how we approach our foster parents when we're presenting that information. That's very good. Thank you guys for sharing. I appreciate it.
I think one of the problems that we face with siblings groups is we have a lot of homes that are either close to overcap or overcap,
Yeah.
and they just don't have enough beds. So if you have a sibling group of 3 or more kids, you don't have a foster home with enough beds, because they may only have room for one more, or they may only have room for a boy, or they, you know, depending on whether or not they're taking, you know, like we have some homes that are just boys or just girls, or they only have room for so many. And with the overcap issues, it's hard to get sibling groups in.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's also one of the things that we're focusing on too. And there have been some changes about the different waiver styles as it relates to placement. And I think, honestly, I can't sit here and try to, you know, tell you what placement does or what licensing does, but I know that they are making some exceptions, and there's some waivers that we could do to potentially place a child in there with their siblings. But that is definitely an issue, like just space availability, whether or not they have the room to take in extra children. In a lot of homes, they're at their maximum capacity and busting at the seams, right? See, in the chat I have, Carrie says, people forget what teenagers are like and or how teenagers are different today than back in my day. Yeah, that's true. Or as we get older, we tend to sort of like romanticize like how well behaved we were. And it's like, no, I definitely wasn't that great of a teenager. I was probably one of those ones they didn't want, right? Like I definitely had opinions. That's not changed today. But I think a lot of people tend to forget what it's like to be a teenager, that you need that extra love. So even if it's your own child, I mean, I'm kind of going through that with my own. I have an 11-year-old, so she's coming into, you know, her pre-teenness, and I have to frequently remind myself, like, okay, she's at that age. And a lot of times it's kind of just remembering back to this is normal teenager stuff, and this is normal adolescent stuff, and the behaviors that we're seeing sometimes it's not necessarily that they have behavioral issues, but we just assume because children are in care that that's what that is. Like, it's their trauma, it's their behavior. It's like, it could just be that's the stage in life that they're in. So I think also recognizing that is important. Thank you, guys. All right, so what considerations should be made if siblings cannot be placed together? Because of course we know that there are situations where siblings can't be placed together. If siblings can't be placed together, we have to prioritize facilitating regular sibling contact. I think for the most part, as a whole, as a system of care, we do a really good job of doing that. We know that we're required to make those sibling contacts when we have siblings that are separated, those separated siblings. We're required to do those weekly visits or bi-weekly, depending on the circumstances of your cases. So as a system, I think we're doing really good with that here in Circuit 5. Right? Because I kind of think we're the best in the state, I'm just saying. But I really feel like we do a really good job of at least keeping it in the forefront of our mind that that's something that we need to focus on. So one of the things that we should consider is developing a plan together to maintain ongoing contact, right? Ask families about supports and adjusting, make adjustments when it's needed. It's not just necessarily the face-to-face contacts that matter, whether or not they can have virtual contact, whether or not they're Facebook friends, they can talk to each other on Facebook Messenger or Skype or FaceTime or all those other things that the young people are into. The role of older youth in developing a plan for regular contact to maintain sibling relationships. That older sibling is usually going to be the one, unless there's like a middle child, because the middle child's kind of like the boss of everybody. But usually the older siblings are the one who are going to be like, yeah, that'll work best for us, right? So really tapping into them and getting their input as it relates to how we should execute that ongoing sibling contact. And then the role of older youth in helping their younger siblings transition to their placement. The older kids, of course, are going to be critical when children come into care. If they are nervous or apprehensive about going to different placements, those younger ones are going to feed off of that energy. If they are, I wouldn't say excited, but if they're okay, if they're comfortable with it, if we've had the conversations with them, specifically ones that are changing placements and we've had that dialogue and they are comfortable and they're at ease with it, then they can help to ease the transition with the younger ones as well. Because of course, if you're a younger sibling like me, you look up to your older sibling for guidance and just sort of like to knowing what's cool, right? Like my brother was older, so he always showed me what was cool and what was, you know, in, right? So they are looking to their older siblings a lot of times. Now, of course, this is not every situation and every sibling group is different. So I don't want to like lump everybody together, but for the most part, we're talking about generally how most siblings are. And even if siblings cannot be placed jointly together, placement of children with a relative caregiver should be prioritized. So we know that we are required to make ongoing efforts to locate relatives, right? That is that family finding piece that we have when we have children who are in out-of-home care. Even if your child or your children are placed with the relatives, still making sure that we're doing ongoing family finding efforts, because we all know what happens if we have them with one relative and we kind of stop with family finding, the active family finding. Then what happens? Maybe it disrupts. Maybe grandma's like, look, I'm getting old. I can't keep doing this. I can't do a 3-year-old anymore. And then we're stuck in a situation where we don't really have a backup plan, or we don't really have anyone to support grandma. So making sure that we are looking for relative caregivers, but also making sure that that relative caregiver not only has a backup, but also maybe they're willing to take the sibling group so that they're not in licensed care. Maybe Aunt Mary can only take one child. Maybe Aunt Mary is a nurse and the sibling group has a 3-pack of kids and the youngest one has significant medical needs. Well, she's got kids of her own, but she's willing to take care of the younger one because she has the medical background. And maybe grandma is okay with taking the 2 older ones. She just can't handle the medical needs of that child. Yes, those siblings are technically separated, but they're with 2 relatives. They're maintaining that familial bond. They'll continue to be around each other, hopefully, and they'll continue to have that sibling bond and that sibling support group. So making sure that we are looking for relatives who are able to take those the sibling groups and even be respite for each other, even help with transportation for each other. Maybe grandma's got to work, and so the aunt is going to pick up the kids after school off the bus when she's picking up her own kids, making sure that they have support systems. So once we do that and we are able to identify that, that will also help to ease the transition and maintain the stability of that placement. Additionally, we kind of just covered this. Any relatives or non-relatives that live near each other, will siblings be able to remain in the same school and daycare as each other? A lot of times when children are separated, even if they're with relatives, I had a case when I was a case manager where there were 2 children, they had different fathers, so they were placed with their respective paternal grandmothers who lived near each other and were willing to do visits, but they were both into like dance or ballet or something like that. And they were going, of course, to dance studios in their respective cities. And we had a conversation about, hey, is there any way that at the end of this, you guys can, put them in a program together near each other? And they ended up going to the same studio and enrolling in the same class. So then they had that continued contact with each other over time. So that worked out really well for them. They still continued to see each other. It was in an organic situation. It wasn't just, our scheduled visits at the office. They were able to see each other and hang out. The grandmas became really close friends and they would do stuff together. They would have dinners together after the dance class. So that became a really cool experience for them as well. And how the identified placements feel about maintaining ongoing contact between the sibling group. If they're in respective homes, then maintaining those bonds. How committed are they to doing that? How committed are they to going to each other's extracurricular activities? Maybe the older sibling is in soccer. Maybe we can bring the younger sibling to the soccer games on the weekends, right? We know that at the end of the day, if these things aren't happening between caregivers, that as case managers, that is our responsibility. It's our duty to ensure that sibling visits are in fact happening and that we're documenting, because I have QM on here. So we're going to always document, right? We're going to document that we're having those ongoing sibling visits. We're going to document that even if we're not doing it, that they are still happening weekly. And then what's going on in those visits, right? And if they can't be placed together, what should we consider? Well, of course, that plan for that ongoing contact, that sibling visitation plan, unless there's specific safety reasons, right? We know that certain children have CPAs, they have child placement agreements. Maybe there's safety plans around it based on the circumstances of why they came into care, or even perhaps just behaviors that they've had. It might not be safe for them to have contact with their siblings. We're making sure that we're taking that in consideration, and we're always assessing it to make sure that is something that still needs to be in place, or has progress been made. Maybe it's a recommendation from a therapist and we need to reach out to the therapist and get more information about it. And sibling visits and contact should correlate with the children's ages, development, and nature of their relationship. We know our younger ones are like, oh, squirrel, and they disappear, right? Maybe having those longer 1-hour visits with a newborn and a 3-year-old, probably they're not getting a whole lot out of it. But maybe if they have shorter times but more frequently, then that bond starts to develop, right? Because they're not necessarily playing with each other, but they're still having that contact and that recognition of, oh, that's my sibling. And the length and time of visits between siblings should be individualized, right? No cookie cutter, and planned around the children's schedules and routines depending on the specific needs of the children. Visits should never be withheld as a form of punishment or reward. And we know that goes the same with our parents as well. We don't withhold our family contact, our family time from our parents. We don't withhold sibling contact from our children as well, right? That's not a punitive thing. It's not, you know, a reward to be able to speak to them. They should be able to have contact with their sibling. Now, the method that they are having contact with their sibling might change based on, you know, what's going on in the household, but not the actual contact. Oops, a little too quickly. When establishing a face-to-face visitation plan, we should consider the following. Were all the caregivers considered, right? Some of our caregivers work. They work full-time jobs. They might not be able to have or host a visit in the middle of the daytime. They might not be able to do it during the weekday. Are we able to accommodate in the evenings or on the weekend? Were the wishes of all the children considered? Maybe some of the children don't necessarily get along with some of the other ones. Maybe being inside of a room where they're just sitting there talking is probably not going to be the best situation. Are we able to make reasonable accommodations for their needs? And then the type of contact that will occur. Again, that's those extracurriculars, those sports, the dance studios, going to camps together. Are we able to, if they're living in, you know, separate foster homes, maybe we can send them away to sleepaway camp together in the summertime. Thinking just kind of outside the box about ways that we can continue to have children maintain their bond and still have that face time with each other, maybe different than just having that face-to-face in the office once a week. And then who's going to participate? Is it going to be family members? Would it be, you know, another person on the children's family team, right? Maybe not necessarily a placement, but maybe an individual such as the aunt who is background screen and it's going to be a safety monitor and who's willing to do visits at the park, right? Maybe, you know, she lives between the two and is able to facilitate that. Who's responsible for transporting siblings for visitation? If the caregivers aren't willing or able to do so, it falls back on case management. We're required to do that. There's no real way to get around it. And plan for resolving a conflict in the visitation schedule. If we have an identified plan and something happens, they know exactly what to do. They're not like, oh, well, it didn't happen today and it didn't happen, it won't happen tomorrow. What do they need to do? How do they need to rearrange that? Sometimes we need to spell that out for people and also for us so we know what the plan is going to be. And not only just those regular sitting in the office or going to the park visitations, but we got to get creative. They can go to each other's birthday parties. They can hang out together. They can go to extracurricular activities. Maybe if they are in drama, they can go to each other's plays or something like that. And then we need to also assess the caregiver's willingness to coordinate with those other family members or the other caregivers so that they can have family activities, right? Because that's just a normal part of being a sibling or being in a family group, is where you're having those natural connections and those natural times where you're spending time together and having family activities, okay? All right, so question. When siblings cannot be placed together, what are examples of practices that you or others in your CMA, in your office, have done to maintain sibling relationships? Valerie says, can they have sleepovers at the other child's home, right? I'm sure based on the circumstances of that family, based on the circumstances of the needs of the children, that's a natural thing that happens, right? Telling ghost stories in the middle of the night, right? That's something that siblings often do.
Hey, Shanika, I was just gonna say, I think some people get confused, like if one child is in one foster home and another child is in another foster home, they think it becomes a licensing issue.
Oh,
We're not talking placement, you
yeah,
know, they can go spend the night, that's normalcy.
yeah,
They're not placed there.
yeah.
And
The
of course, you have to have the buy-in of both foster parents, but I have seen that utilized where they let the kids have sleepovers, or
Yeah.
they have pool days, or, just all different types of things.
Right. And that is totally normal. And thank you, Valerie, for bringing that up. That is, I think you're right. A lot of people do think like, oh, that's a licensing thing. It's not really. That falls under normalcy. Christina says sibling visitation, Zoom calls, telephone calls. Right. Those are things that they can use. Patricia says telephone calls, Zoom, sibling visits. Right. Those are all ways that we can continue to maintain contact or maintain those sibling bonds in with our children that are in care. Thank you, guys. So what are some reasons that children shouldn't be placed together? So we know that there are some situations where children cannot be placed together, right? Based on various different needs, various different circumstances. Some children just cannot be placed together. So if siblings can't be placed together, there has to be a very clear and specific reason as to why. Perhaps like the children in our slide, right? They probably shouldn't be placed together. When joint placement is not appropriate, plans must be made for how the relationships will be supported in other ways. So those are those ongoing sibling visitations, even if it's not the face-to-face visitations. Maybe they need to engage in family counseling to where they're in a safe place, a safe supervised place, but they're able to work on their bonds. They're able to work on their relationship in a controlled environment, right? And then children and youth can have relationships with people who they don't live with, right? They can continue having those relationships even if they can't be placed together, even if based on one child's specific needs, they can't be housed together. We can still, as the agency, make ongoing efforts to ensure that those sibling bonds are maintained. So we're getting ready to watch a really quick clip, it's a tongue twister, a really quick clip of two siblings. You guys may recognize these siblings. And this is an example of a sibling dynamic to where they probably wouldn't be placed together, okay? Hopefully you can hear my audio.
Oh, I shall practice my curtsy.
Don't turn your back on me, Scar.
Oh, no, Mufasa. Perhaps you shouldn't turn your back on me.
Is that a challenge?
Temper. I wouldn't dream of challenging you.
Pity. Why not?
Well, as far as brains go, I got the lion's share, but when it comes to brute strength, I'm afraid I'm at the shallow end of the gene pool.
Scar! Brother, help me!
Long live the king.
So perhaps not two siblings we would want placed in the same foster home, right? That would probably not be a good situation. We're probably going to need us a safety plan around some of these behaviors, right? But we knew that about Scar and Mufasa. So if they were children in care and we were their case managers, that would be one of those things, that relationship would be something, or it's an example of something that we would really need to focus on as it relates to their placement. That is going to be a situation where we probably could not place them together, at least not initially. So that's something that we would want to consider, right?
Oh.
All right. And if placing them together is not in their best interest, maybe alternative plans for maintaining and nurturing those sibling relationships may be required, right? If they do have those Scar and Mufasa situations, we need to make sure that we are still putting in place, when it's safe, a plan so that they can continue to have that contact. We need to understand that depending on the nature and the extent of that sibling conflict, maybe abuse that went on between that relationship, maybe that is not something that we can necessarily do in good faith, and it might require us to have ongoing, I guess, have them work with a therapist to have that ongoing, I guess, working on their relationship, repairing their relationship. And then also consider each child's feelings about the quality of the relationship with their sibling. Maybe they feel that they don't have a good relationship with their sibling, or they don't want to engage with their sibling, right? Maybe they're kind of done with that sibling. What can we do to help facilitate maintaining those relationships with each other? Are there specific services that can be offered to the children to reestablish a healthy relationship? We need to consider that beyond maybe just the therapeutic visits. What about if they were in some sort of extracurricular together? If it's a safe situation where we don't have to have a safety plan around their contact. Maybe if they're engaging in a natural situation, like maybe we can put them in the same Boy Scout troop or the same Brownie troop, Girl Scouts, right? Then maybe that's a natural situation where they can do things, but they don't necessarily have to be face to face with each other all the time, right? They don't necessarily have to be placed together, but they can still be around each other. And then the impact of joint placement on individual permanency. Like we spoke about earlier, sometimes one child's specific needs can jeopardize the way that another child's stability, or another child achieving permanency. Maybe when the children are together, one regresses and the other one becomes parentified, because that has always been the dynamic. But if they remain separate, then they tend to thrive and grow on their own, and we see a lot of progress with them. So that's something that we also need to keep in mind when we are looking at trying to find a way to keep them together or to put them back together. And then situations in which alternative plans for maintaining and nurturing sibling relationships. So these are the ones that had that extensive physical and mental health needs, right? The ones that we were talking about before. That includes these, but it's not limited to just these, but the reasons why the siblings were separated initially, right? So that Scar and Mufasa kind of thing, where they can't be together because they're either combative or because of mental health needs or because of other needs. And we have to make sure for one child's safety, like this poor little thing over here, who's very clearly being attacked by its older sibling, right? Making sure that their safety is our priority, okay? So in these situations, we should consider the children's feelings about the relationship, the individual child's needs. Is it something that's chronic? Is it like, a limitation? Like maybe they have medical conditions where they can't be transported very far. How do those needs interfere with placement? Are there services available to help stabilize that child's needs so that maybe we can get them into a mutual foster home? What efforts have we made to provide therapeutic services? And then the caregiver's feelings about the needed response. How do they feel about it? Are they receptive to it? Are they receptive to thinking outside the box, to doing things in a non-traditional way? And then what efforts have we already made to avoid disruption of the relationships? Because at all costs, we want to continue those if it is safe and appropriate to do so. Can individual needs of the children be adequately managed? Is there a way that we can manage those behaviors so that they can continue having that relationship? And would the delay for individual permanency be a result of their connection with their siblings, right? So we're getting ready to watch a short clip of some siblings who have some of those complex needs, where we have one sibling that is parentified and then another sibling, the three of them are placed into a foster home, and there's some dynamic issues going on here. The younger child is looking to the oldest child for that guidance and that authority, even though there are established caregivers in place. And then you see kind of like that power struggle that's happening.
Where's my potato chips?
Oh, we're not having chips tonight, Munchkin. Sorry.
I want my chips.
Lita, Lizzie. Pete and I worked really hard on this dinner, and there's lots of yummy food for you to eat.
No!
Hey,
Lita,
vete a tu cuarto. Please.
Oye, ¿por qué me estás
Lizzie, please. Lizzie, no, okay? I've got this.
Why are you yelling at me? I'm just trying to help you.
I'm not yelling. I am. Just then I was, but look, Lita, don't do what Lizzie just said. What did you say? Cuatro, go to your bedroom.
No,
go to the
quattro
bedroom,
means
go to the bathroom.
quart, like quart of milk, right? She said
Okay.
you're not gonna have
Yeah.
potato chips, but you will drink that milk.
In any case, we have this. It's fine.
Okay, fine.
Okay, let's try some of this meatloaf, okay?
No!
Hey,
chips!
not having chips.
Yeah, I don't think she's getting on board with the plan, honey.
I don't want this!
You sure you don't want to just give her some chips?
No, we're not giving her chips. We're just gonna eat.
Lita, stay right there.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. Don't cry. Relax. Watch your feet, okay?
Freeze, Pete.
I didn't
Go,
mean to.
Mom,
I'm
just
so
be careful,
sorry.
okay?
Hey, you give those to me. Give me those.
Calm down. Don't cry. I'll get it. Just stay there, Mom.
These are really, really good potatoes.
Oh, God.
Oh my God, you okay?
God. What a... Lita, duck.
What are you doing?
What? I'm trying to put it out.
With ketchup?
Put it out.
Lita?
Wait. What's that noise? Why is she growling? That wasn't in the classes. I got nothing for that. She's got a knife.
It's just a SpongeBob
It's
knife.
still a knife.
Just put the knife down, honey.
Look, kid, just put down the weapon, okay?
You guys want me to deal with this, or do you still got it?
Yeah, do you want to let her jump in here now, please?
Okay, fine.
Mira, ve a bañarte y de ahí vas a tu cuarto y vas a dormir, ¿ya?
Gracias. No, you gotta learn some Spanish.
Why would you give a kid milk in a glass cup?
I'm sorry. I didn't.
Why did she do that? I hate her. Where's my potato?
So even when we have children that are in parentified situations, we know that that might require us to do a little work on their relationship so they can establish healthy boundaries, trusting relationships with those caregivers. But it's not necessarily a reason that they need to be separated. It can be, maybe they need to be separated for a little bit of time and then brought back together. But just because they have that relationship does not necessarily mean that it's a reason for us to separate them. Just might require us to do some ongoing work and put some ongoing effort into their relationship. So it is about 2:07, so we're going to take a quick break. I will see you guys back here at about 2:25. Okay. All right, guys, welcome back from break. Hope you guys are rested and you stretched and you got a snack and you're hydrated. Go ahead and finish. All right, so we left off We were talking about complex sibling needs and some of the reasons why children could be placed together, or parentified siblings who might be the parent or the caregiver figure for that sibling group. So let's continue our conversation that we were having about what consideration should be made if a sibling enters out of home care and a potential joint placement is considered. We know that not all siblings enter foster care at the same time. Maybe they are with a relative, maybe with another relative, maybe with a non-custodial parent, or were with a non-custodial parent and now they have entered care. We should take particular care and consideration when that happens, when we now have a sibling who is coming into care who was not originally in care. Maybe they were born after the case started and now they're coming into care. To look at the following things. Look at the sibling who is already in care, their current caregiver. See if they are willing and able to take on another sibling, to take that sibling into their home so they can now have a mutual foster home. Then consider if there's any barriers that we could help overcome, right? If we have a licensed foster home, is there a waiver that we could get? Maybe they are at max capacity, but maybe we can get an overcap waiver. If there's any additional supports that we can put in place to help that parent or that caregiver maintaining the children together. Maybe they don't have the means to go get another bed, or they don't have the space and all they have is the one. Are there community resources available that we can look into to help them get maybe a bunk bed so that now we can house the two children, right, in that one room? And is that parent able to actually parent that child to the same level and quality that they have been with the other one? Sometimes maybe that's just too much for them to bear. And with the potential joint placement of siblings, disrupt the placement of another sibling. If that child, if they get together and they have that Scar Mufasa kind of relationship, is that going to cause some disruption in that placement? Is that going to potentially lead to maybe a child who was placed there first and they were stable and everything was great, and then that other sibling, based on their relationship, they now have caused some commotion in the home, and now it threatens the stability of the home for both of those children when there initially weren't any issues that were occurring in the home? Those are things that we have to consider. So what consideration should be made if a new sibling enters foster home? So it says if a joint sibling placement cannot be made in an existing placement or at initial placement, so when they are initially removed and they have to be separated, there are numerous factors that must be considered in determining if an existing placement should be disrupted to secure a potential joint placement. So we know that after October 1st, when we had SB 80 roll out, there were numerous things that happened, but one of those things was that MDT staffing. And again, of course, we've always done MDT staffings, but now it's a part of law, right? Like now we are required to do the MDT staffings at these specific periods of time. So one of those things that we need to consider here is whether or not putting them together and disrupting one is actually in their best interests, right? So that is something that we'll be discussing typically at our MDT staffing if we're considering moving the children, okay? So when we're having those staffings and we're considering the movement or the disruption of one placement, we have to look at the relationship as a whole. There are various different things that we need to consider, right? Who are the siblings that we're considering, right? The ages of the siblings, right? Is there an established bond? Maybe if there's an 8-year-old with a newborn, maybe they don't have a real strong bond, and maybe they can be placed separately, and then we work out putting them together. But is disrupting the placement of the older child in that child's best interest? It's something that we need to consider. What is the nature of the relationship? Is it a strong and supportive relationship? That's with the caregivers. Is that child really bonded with that caregiver and doing really well? We know that sometimes a child comes into care and may have some identified behaviors, but then their behaviors seem to taper off and like stabilize when they're in a structured environment with one caregiver. If disrupting that child's placement to put them with another child, is that going to disrupt what they have going on there? Is that going to disrupt their stability? It's something that we have to consider. And what's the preference of the siblings if they are able to articulate one? There are some siblings who, of course, are Scar and Mufasa, who don't necessarily want to live together. They love them, but we're good being separate. We can live totally separate lives and be okay, right? Some of us feel that way about our siblings as well. And then what is the potential of the relationship the siblings are likely to have if they are placed together? Is it going to improve their relationship, or is it going to be more harmful, right? We have to take that in consideration when we're looking at that. So the sibling to sibling relationship must be carefully considered when we're, again, talking about what is the age of the child? What is the child's preferences about placement? How long has that child been with that caregiver? How strong is the attachment between the child and the caregiver? Is the caregiver a permanency resource? Is that somebody that we're looking to maybe close out if reunification is no longer an option and we need a concurrent goal or an alternative permanency goal? Are we looking at that person is going to be the permanent guardian? That person is going to potentially adopt, if that's what we're looking at. Are there any strong relationships between the child and anyone else in the home? Maybe they are really bonded with another one of the children in the home, or with, grandpa who's in the home, right? How many moves and caregivers has the child experienced, right? So we're looking at yet another disruption, yet another placement change. Is that in line with their goal, right? We don't want to have children who are continuing to have placement disruptions. It's actually something that's captured on our CFSR. And the caregiver's willingness to stay involved with the child. Are they willing, if they are no longer in their home, if they're no longer their caregiver, are they willing to continue that relationship? With a new caregiver, be able to become the primary attachment? Would that child have an issue attaching to the new caregiver and seeing them as the authority figure in the home, seeing them as the person that they go to for safety, for nurturing, and to have like a loving, appropriate bond, right? A lot of times they move away from someone that they become very bonded with, or they feel like that is going to be my forever. I'll just stay here since my mom is doing her thing. I'll just stay here. And then we disrupt that placement to move them to what we think is a permanent situation or more permanent situation. And then they have a hard time bonding with people. They have a hard time trusting people. We have to consider each individual child's needs. And the potential harm to the child must be carefully considered. So like I initially started talking about before, like the potential of having those adverse consequences as a result of disrupting their placement. We want to make sure that we're considering, is there clear evidence that the benefits of disrupting a placement outweigh the risks to the child? We want to make sure that we're taking that in consideration. If we're disrupting the child, following the disruptions, like what's going to happen? What are the ramifications? Are they going to be, are they going to have to go to a different school? Are they going to have to be in different dance troops or different Eagle Scouts? I don't really know. And is that more important? Does that outweigh the movement into a different foster home? And if not, especially for children who are between the ages of 9 months to 5 years old, that's when they start forming those healthy attachments, those bonds to their caregivers. So if during that time period, if they've had a significant amount of time with those caregivers, and that is their safety, that is their, their person, if we move them out of that just for the sake of putting children together, what does that do to our children and their attachment styles as they get older? And then well-established harms of disrupted attachment shifts the presumption from sibling togetherness to maintaining established attachments, especially in younger children. Then if our children are also involved with any sort of therapeutic treatment, we want to make sure that we are seeking the guidance and the input of the therapist who understands that child, understand that child's mental health needs, making sure that the potential disruption to that foster home is not going to cause undue harm or additional trauma that might cause that child to have a setback. Right? Because if they move, they might not necessarily be moving down the street. They might move into a different school. They might have issues with friend groups. They may have finally started coming out of their shells, and they're trusting people and learning that, you know, it's okay to be in these situations, right? We have to take that in consideration. And what actions and considerations should be taken if one sibling leaves care? So we know that our children hopefully are exiting foster care, but sometimes they don't always leave together, right? If we have one child that maybe is aging out of care and they're having alternative permanency goals, or maybe they are placed with a non-maltreating parent, if that is the situation and they're going to close out with their non-maltreating parent, and that other child continues on in foster care, what is the sibling relationship going to be like once we step out of the picture? Are they going to be able to maintain that ongoing contact once that child ages out of care, or once the case closes out and that child achieves permanency? We want to make sure that we are discussing that and have a plan in place for that. Want to engage the caregivers about the importance of that ongoing contact, even through the permanency process. Even if we know that they're going to they have separate permanency goals. One is going toward adoption, the other is going PG maybe, or is going to sole custody with that parent. If we are able to get the caregivers on board and get them committed to maintaining that bond and maintaining that ongoing contact, that is going to help them with maintaining those sibling relationships. So we need to be able to work with the caregivers to help them resolve any barriers that might be helping them brainstorm and think outside of the box. Aside from just having those face-to-face contacts, what else could we do? Is technology an issue? How can we assist with that? Okay. And then what are ongoing considerations after initial placement, visitation, and contact decisions have been made? So with sibling visitation, contacts, and ongoing relationships, that should be continuously assessed. We should always be looking at that. We should always be assessing that, even if we are not doing the visits ourselves, maybe if an FSW is doing it, maybe if a third party like our caregivers are doing that. Talking to them about the quality of those visits, talking to them about whether or not the plans that are in place are sufficient to meet the children's needs, whether or not they need some sort of ongoing supports, whether or not there's any services that we could help with. And then asking the children about the quality of the relationship, right? Whether or not they feel like they are not getting enough time. A lot of our children who age out of care, that is their one lament, that they didn't get to see their younger siblings often, and they were essentially the caregiver for their younger brother and sister when they were with their parent. And then once they were removed, they didn't really get to see them that much. And that does a lot to their bond, but also to that child as well. And then the caregiver's feelings about their role in supporting the relationships between the siblings. Do we have any specific requests, or there's any ideas about how they can enhance that relationship? Remember, the family and the family's team are going to be the expert about that family and the family's needs. So we're always going to inquire of them what they need. We're always going to look to them to give us the information about what's going to help their family and what's going to work for their family. And again, what is working well and what should be continued and what or enhanced. What if some of the challenges that have been? Those are things that we're going to talk to them about when we're having those ongoing discussions with them. If there are any concerns or any challenges that have prevented joint placements, have those issues been resolved? Have we as a case management agency done our part to address those identified needs? If perhaps they can't be placed together initially, we don't just keep them separate, until forever. We still need to make ongoing assessments and try to figure out whether or not we can do something to eventually bring them back together, to potentially place them back together, even if after they first came into care, they were separated. And if they are placed together, we need to adjust for any challenges or changes that have strained the relationship. Maybe being apart has greatly affected the way that they interact. Maybe they had different caregivers. Maybe they've experienced different things as a result of being separated. What does their relationship look like now? How can we help to improve that relationship and enhance the quality of their relationship? Okay, so this is the sibling assessment tool that I was speaking to you guys about. I believe this is on page 10 in your participant guide. It's very small here. Remember, I was telling you that the sibling assessment tool, when we normally think of like an assessment or a tool, we're thinking of something like our family functioning assessments, right? Where you put information in and you yield a result, or you get some sort of guidance about how to proceed with the family. This is not that. The sibling assessment tool is really used to help shape the way in which we discuss siblings and their placements and their joint placements or their separated placements. It's really a guide for us to make sure that we're covering all the things that need to be discussed and talked about as it relates to the siblings. It's not a checklist. It's not like we're going to go down and make sure that all those things are checked, but it is for us to make sure that we are discussing these things and keeping these individual needs in the forefront when we're discussing their ongoing needs. So the first little bullet says sibling placement should be prioritized. Sibling placement should be made a priority, which we know, of course, right? The current relationship between the child and the current caregivers must be considered. Do they have a strong enough relationship? Would that cause that one child complete damage or cause them harm and trauma being removed from that caregiver? We have to consider that. For all joint placement considerations, additional supports and resources should be made available to caregivers. And then alternatives to sibling placements. Contact between siblings should continue even if the older expectations, I don't know what that means, even if an older expectation should be set to provide for additional sibling placements that are located close to another, if that can be considered. Sibling placements with caregivers that are supportive of maintaining that sibling relationship, we should prioritize those. Sibling relationships should be prioritized. If a placement is not secured for a sibling group, the sibling relationship must be prioritized and maintained. We still have to continue making sure that we're focusing on their ongoing bond. Do we have a concrete visitation plan in place for the siblings? If not, we are required to develop one. Then what are those expectations? What does it look like? Are they going to email? Are they going to FaceTime? Are they Facebook friends? Are they Snapchat friends? What's the other one? TikTok. Are they on each other's TikToks? They do joint TikToks. All those things. Exceptions to the sibling placement and relationship. If there are situations where maybe the relationship is abusive or it is unsafe, then we need to consider that. So this is a guide in how we need to think about placement with our children, with our siblings together. If we're looking at disrupting one placement to put them together, we need to consider the relationship that the siblings have with each other and the relationship that they have with their respective caregivers, whether or not disrupting that placement to put them together is really in their best interest, or would it cause some harm? Does that the bad outweigh the good, or does the good outweigh the bad? And then if the placements do happen, if placement changes do happen, what happens, or if they don't happen, what happens when a child ages out of care or is no longer in foster care? What happens then? So do we see that this is more of like a guide to like shape the way that we have conversations, as opposed to like I put information in like a family functioning assessment? It's a guide. It's not a checklist. It is not it's not like an assessment per se, but it's really a guide to help us to shape the way that we look at our siblings when we're getting ready to consider disrupting placements or trying to put them together. So we have an activity. DCF was gracious enough to give us an activity. So it is the sibling assessment tool. You guys have this in your participant guide, activity A. We're gonna do this together. Let's see. I'm going to stop sharing for a second because I cannot see the guide as well. Oh, where is it? Okay. It is trying to find it in your book. Activity A begins on page, I think it's page 11 for you guys. Does everybody see that? Okay. Okay. So for the first activity, it says, let's think about the sibling assessment tool. So that was the thing that we just covered, right? Remember, it's not like an actual tool. It's that guiding document. So the first question is, how can using the sibling assessment tool impact the lives of children in foster care? How do we think that as child welfare professionals, this can affect, just that tool can affect the lives of children in foster care, our children on our caseloads?
I guess I would say if we skip one of the steps, it would affect sibling relationships.
Yeah, it could. It could have an impact on their relationship, a negative impact on the relationship. Thank you. How specifically do you think that it could affect their relationship?
Like you said, negatively, it could, I don't want to say strain the relationship, but the contact that they have or that they once had before when they were together cease to exist, and then they are almost like further apart from each other, not only in distance, but with the relationship as well.
Right, it can cause some strain on their relationship, right? They're not living in the same home, they're not having those continued shared experiences, they're not, experiencing the same things day in and day out. Definitely have an impact on their relationship. There's something else? Any other ideas about how it would affect our children in foster care? What about permanency for our children? Could it affect that if we're not taking into consideration their relationship? Because if we have them separated for 9 months to a year, and then grandma comes in and wants to take placement of both of the kids, maybe they're two totally different kids now. Maybe grandma's not going to be able to handle those two different personalities because their relationship is so different. Maybe we need to focus on that because we weren't doing a good job of that before, right? And then how can the sibling assessment impact your work with children and their families? How is that going to help you as a case manager, as a supervisor, as a licensing specialist? Any thoughts? What about at NDT staffings? Using it to help think about and brainstorm about specific ways that we can make sure that we are helping the siblings maintain their bond, right? Maybe we are not utilizing or using their sibling contact to the best of their ability. Maybe it's hard because they're so far, because they have such different lives and schedules. You know, our teens, they get involved in extracurricular activities. Maybe they're playing for 2 Pop Warner teams in, you know, opposite parts of the county. Maybe they can be on the same Pop Warner team, right? So using our sibling assessment can be beneficial for that, okay? All right, if you scroll down on your next page, you're following along in your participant guide. I won't show you on the PowerPoint. We have activity B. Some things to take into consideration. We have like a little, I don't know, a little scenario down at the bottom. It's sort of like intake information. There's some questions up at the top. How did the tool guide your thinking and considerations? How did the tool promote partnership with others? How did the tool promote advocacy for children? How did the tool emphasize support for caregivers and promote relationships, and then guide decision making? So we have a little scenario about the Franklin family. Would someone be so kind as to read the Franklin family scenario for us? Please just take yourselves off of mute.
I can read it.
Thank you.
A neighbor reported that the Franklin children were left home alone often and had started begging neighbors for food. The Franklin family consists of Mom Amanda, who is 26 years old, Dad Alan, who is 27 years old, Carly, the 7-year-old daughter, Brandon, the 5-year-old son, George, the 3-year-old son, and Frankie, the 2-year-old son. The family has been experiencing a lack of food and consistent shelter after the parents' drug use increased. The children were reported to be dirty, and the home itself was filled with debris that included soiled diapers, molded food, urine and feces on the furniture, and unsanitary bathroom. The parents were not at home when the agency arrived, so the children were taken into custody. Carly was observed to be very protective of the younger children. Upon further investigation, it was discovered that the mother has a sister in the neighboring county who's been estranged and has no relationship with the younger children, so she's only willing to take Carly. The maternal grandmother has health issues that prevent her from helping care for the children. The paternal grandparents expressed that they would like to help, but cannot take all of the children. They seem worried about taking on a parenting role because they are older, linked on a fixed income, and the children have only seen them on holidays. They would like time to think about what they can do to help. There are no foster families available to take all 4 of the children.
Okay, thank you so much. So in thinking about our sibling assessment tool, let's go back to it on page 10. We're looking at it. We're looking at the sibling placement should be prioritized, right? We want to try to make sure that they're together. Do we have any relatives who are able to take all the children? No. We have 2 sets of potential relative caregivers, maybe. We have the aunt who's willing to take the older child, but not so much the younger ones. We have a grandmother who would love to take the children, but has some health issues, right? So that those are those other considerations right down at the bottom of that sibling assessment tool, something that we need to take and consider when we're looking at placing the children there. Let's see, the relationship of the siblings to the caregiver. Grandma and grandpa have a relationship with the kids, but they've only seen them on the holidays. But with Carly, she has, it seems, maybe a more established relationship with that older or with the aunt, with the other aunt, the other relative. What are some other things? Do the children have any specialized or identified physical or medical needs?
Say that again. Do the children have what?
Do they have any identified physical or medical needs that might complicate them being placed together?
I didn't read that.
No, they don't. It's not a trick question.
I'm just concerned that the one daughter is Carly is kind of motherly.
Yeah, she's a little motherly. So if we have them in separate homes, if we separate them, is that going to cause harm to her? Maybe.
It could cause trauma and stress for her and anxiety.
Right, because she's worried about her younger siblings, right? Let's see, what else is there? Says the maternal grandmother has health issues that prevent her from helping to care for the children. The paternal grandparents express that they would like to help but can't take all children. And they think that the older one is taking on a parenting role. They live on a fixed income, so maybe that's not going to work for them, right? But we see how if we go down that sibling assessment tool, that we're able to kind of start fleshing out some of it. It's pointing out or it's highlighting some of the things that we need to take into consideration, that we need to mull over prior to just separating them or prior to trying to find a placement. Maybe for this situation, maybe going with the aunt might be in her best interest, right? She has someone that she's close and connected to, and the younger children could be together in a different home. That might be a situation. So the sibling assessment tool is used to kind of guide those conversations and guide our thinking as it relates to the potential of placing them together or to separate them. So we have to use this in conjunction with our transition tool when children are initially removed. So if we have cases that come into care, we should be using this to make sure at that initial staffing that we're taking all these things into consideration. And then as the case progresses and we're looking at putting them in mutual foster homes, then perhaps we need to pull this back out and have these discussions and look at this. So this sibling assessment tool has to be completed anytime that we get ready to do those change of placements or have those placement disruptions. And when we have siblings who are separated, it is something that has to now be documented in FSFN. That is a new requirement. We have to document that we are having these conversations and that we are using the sibling assessment tool along with that transition tool. Now, I will say this, it is, DCF was they were clear about us having to use it, but they are leaving the discretion about how to execute that up to the individual agency. So your respective agency is going to develop a process about how this is going to be documented and how it's going to be, or where it's going to be put in FSFN. It just has to be there. And so you might need to check in with your respective agencies to find out how this is going to look for your agency and how you should be doing this or capturing this information. It may be something that's going to be captured at your NDT staffing. Maybe that person's going to do it. Maybe you're going to be responsible for doing it, but it has to be captured in FSFN as us having done it. Make sense? Okay. All right. Let's move on to our planful transition. Please let me know if you can see my PowerPoint. Okay, all right. So planful transitions. So many of you have, being in the field, you've experienced arranging transitions, right? Picking children up from one placement, transporting them to another one, moving them from licensed placement to relative placement. We have to make sure that we are paying attention to how we are supporting, maintaining those relationships. Of course, based on the individual needs, but we are encouraged to sort of ask those questions about how this is going to look after the child is no longer there. And then we also need to recognize that transitions are difficult for everybody involved, not just the children, not just the caregivers, that the transitions are, harder for our younger ones, especially because they're young, they're vulnerable, they've built those attachments to those caregivers, so they look to them for safety and for comfort. And if we now move them from one caregiver to another one, is that going to cause any additional trauma? Is that going to cause any trauma, especially as they're developing? We know that there is no magic transition process, right? There's no specific transition time frame that is going to cause or not cause grief and loss and fear and anxiety. We have to understand that when we transition, even when we transition ourselves as adults, sometimes that causes grief, that causes anxiety, causes a loss. So for those children, if they are living with the foster parent or they're living with their caregiver and they have been for a significant amount of time, them moving from that foster parent or that caregiver to another caregiver can be considered a loss. It could be as significant as a death for these children, because that is the person whom they have sought safety and shelter with and comfort from. So then now moving them from that caregiver to another strange situation or to another caregiver could be detrimental to them. So we need to take that in consideration when we're considering transitions. What can we do as the agency to help alleviate some of that? What can we do to make sure that it is a smoother transition where we are not having additional trauma? We know that there might be some trauma, but what can we do to kind of mitigate some of that trauma that could happen, right? How can we ease that transition? So those are some of the things that we need to consider as we're looking at disrupting placements and then that transition, right? So that's that transition plan. So we're gonna watch a quick clip about a planned but a not planned transition out of a home, and we'll see how it affects them and how it affects not just the children, but also the former caregiver.
All right, now, when we put our cups together, we will make the clink sound with our mouths. Ready? Edith? Clink. There we go. And now we drink. And Agnes? Clink. Very good. Excuse me, girls.
Oh, come on.
Don't worry, I'll be back. Keep clinking.
Clink, clink.
Oh, Miss Eddie, what are you doing here?
I'm here for the girls. I received a call that you wanted to return them. And also, I did purchase a Spanish dictionary. I didn't like what you said.
But Oh. I will get the girls ready.
Take us, Mr. Gru. Tell her you want to keep us.
All right, girls, come on, let's go.
Goodbye, Mr. Gru. Thanks for everything.
So that was a semi-planned transition, right? If you guys have ever seen the Minions movie, the first one, he did not want them at the house, and he called her. I was like, you gotta come get these kids. And so of course that did not happen initially. Then he started forging connections with them, and they really started bonding. It really became a family. So that that unplanned transition where she showed up to take the children back. Look at their faces, look at the reactions. They're holding on to him. They've now forged connections with them. He's feeling a way about it. The kids are feeling a way about it, right? It's almost like a death to be separated from that caregiver, that person who you have learned to trust, that person who you have learned to seek safety from or with. And now that's being severed, right? That's going to cause like that additional trauma. Whereas if we could have planned this better, and we could have done the work and done, our due diligence in making sure that we are creating a transition plan that is sufficient, we can help to minimize some of that trauma and really help them to ease into it. What are some ideas that we might have had if this was our real situation, you were the case manager? What is something that we could have done to help ease that transition?
Stay at the home more than 5 minutes.
Stay at the home more than 5 minutes. Okay, what would that have done? We're staying at the home more than 5 minutes.
It can help the children relax.
Yeah.
And be less fearful as just being dropped with strangers.
Yeah. Thank you. Carla, you had a question?
A question, because I'm kind of confused. Who asked for the removal? The caregiver?
Yeah, originally.
But then he's
and
looking
then-
like he's surprised when she gets to the door.
Well, they didn't come initially. So in the movie, he he gets the kids and then he's like, I don't want to take care of kids. Like who thought this was a good idea, right? He's a villain, right? That's what he's seeking to be, like the biggest villain in the world and take over the world. And then over time, he forges these connections with them. It's like that, kind of like the odd couple where he doesn't necessarily intend to become bonded to the children, and then he does. And then so she finally shows up to collect the children, I guess, to place them somewhere else. And then he's like, but I kind of like them now.
Well, she probably could have a conversation with him before getting to the house.
Right.
Having that communication between the case manager and the parent.
I'm glad you made that connection. As case managers, that is one of those things. If we have that communication beforehand and let that caregiver know, the caregiver, they were in the middle of having a whole tea party. The unicorn was there, the minion was there, they're all toasting it up, right? But if they had that communication as the case manager with the caregiver, hey, I'm coming to get the kids. They're getting ready to go to, I don't know, a forever home or a new placement or a pre-adoptive placement. Now we're having that conversation. Maybe that caregiver can facilitate easing that transition, having those conversations, explaining to them, hey, this is what's getting ready to happen. But that's going to also help to reduce some of that trauma, some of that fear, some of that anxiety. Why? Because they're having the conversations. A lot of our children, they have those abandonment issues. And now it's just like one more adult that's giving up on us, one more adult that's throwing us away, because that's what essentially they were feeling in that moment. So instead of them just being ripped away and then transported to another home, having that conversation where the caregivers can explain, hey, remember you were going, this is going to be part of your permanency goal. You're going to go to your forever home, so that it's not just a sudden shift for them, even if they know that that ultimately is their goal. But having that conversation that this is what's getting ready to happen, that can help to minimize that trauma. So as case managers, we need to do our part. We're part of this too. We can cause some additional stress and fear and anxiety, but we can also work as a team with our caregivers to help minimize that. And like you guys were saying earlier, maybe spending more than just 5 minutes at the house can help, right? Help break some of that tension, because we know that a lot of kids, they have that trauma, they have that PTSD, that whenever we come there, you ever have those kids, especially with our newer cases, the moment that you come in, they freeze. They're like, oh God, the people are back, right? The alphabet people are back. They're gonna come take us away. But then after a few minutes and you engaging them, the tensions start to lower and they start to lower their guards and engage with us. So taking that time is really important for us to help ease the transitions. We can do a lot. Thank you guys for sharing. So I think we actually talked about a lot of these different things about what we know about transitions, but we know that transition is a difficult time, right? For some personalities more than others. Some personality styles or some attachment styles are a little more difficult, and they accept change a little more than others. Or some, they just have a really hard time with change. If we set those time frames, those cookie cutter time frames, like they're going to do 3 overnight visits, and then they're going to go over to Aunt Peggy's house. They're going to stay at Aunt Peggy's house. Does that really work for them? We don't know. Is that something that can be played by ear, right? We need to be able to understand that. It has to be able to support the unique needs of each of those children and the caregivers as well. Then having that ongoing communication between each parent and child, and then us, right? And then also maybe their therapist if needed, especially when we're talking about those non-emergency transitions, those non-emergency planned placement changes, right? Consider how it's going to affect our kids, but also maybe the other kids in the home, and how all of that is going to affect everyone. And like I just said, how it's going to affect everyone in the home, the impact to all the family members as we transition children into or out of the home. Then whenever possible, the people who know the child best or the ones that are involved in their day-to-day basis, they should be the ones that we are seeking their input and their guidance about the transition, about how it's going to work best. So we should be meeting with them ahead of time, engaging them in discussion about how that is going to help facilitate a smooth transition. What can we do, right? And then information sharing during those transitions. That's going to help one caregiver to the next caregiver really understand how to help that child. Think about like discipline. Maybe one child responds very well to a sticker chart for chores, or maybe they need Mr. Snuggly to go to bed at night, right? Having that information, being able to share that information with the next caregiver can really help with the transition for our kids. So, question. Imagine as a parent, you are sending your children ages 7, 9, and 13 to a residential camp for 1 week. They're going to sleepaway camp, right? They're going to summer camp. You've heard great things about this camp, and it is 2 hours away from your home. All camp counselors are background screened. They're trained, I guess they're trained in CPR and first aid, and they are approved to care for children. Thinking about your own child or a child that you know and you're very close with, prior to dropping your children off at camp for that week, what would you and your children want to know? What would you want to know as a caregiver before you dropped your kids off in the middle of the wood, middle of the Ocala forest at, I don't know what the name of the Elks one out there. Y'all know what I'm talking about. What would you want to know about the camp?
What activities are planned?
What activities are planned, right? What are they gonna be doing all day? They're just gonna be out here running around in the woods? Like, what are we doing? Collecting ticks? Good. What else would we want to know?
Sleeping arrangements.
Sleeping arrangements, where they're going to be sleeping. Is this boy, girl, is this all girls and all boys? What is the situation? Where are they going to be sleeping? They have cots, they got sleeping bags, they're gonna be outside in the woods, they got bunk beds. Where are they going to be sleeping?
What they need to bring with them.
What they need to bring with them, right? Like how they need to be prepared. Do they need to have their own supply of off, or is that going to be provided, right? Do we need sunscreen? Do we need swimming gear? Donnell says, personally, for me, that is a no-go. I'm too hypervigilant due to childhood and very protective. I mean, I am too. My child doesn't get to go to sleepaway camp, but you know, some people are a little less, I don't know, overprotective, like you and I apparently are. Carla's shaking her head. She's like, all the kids can go. Oh, you're a no. Yeah.
No way.
I know. I have some issues with that.
For me.
But if we were going to, and we're thinking about our kids personally, like what are some of the things that you'd want to know? Now we know that they're background checked. So we know that, and we know that they can do CPR and administer first aid. But what else is something?
Well, you can't trust the backgrounds. That's my problem. Just because they have a clear background does not mean they are not perpetrators. They just haven't been caught yet.
Okay, in a perfect world, we're gonna do like the utopian version. So we know that they're not like the killer, right? That's what I use in my training class to say the killer, right? So we know that they're not the killer. We know that they're not the perpetrator. So they're clear as far as that. We don't have any like safety concerns. What would be something else that we'd want to know about?
Can my child go to the office and call me at any point in time without any restriction and talk to me without being listened to?
Right. What does that situation look like? Do they just have a couple minutes that they're allowed in the evenings? Is it one of those things where they can have ongoing contact as much as they want? Can they have a cell phone? Can I get in contact with them? What if I have a spider sense that lets me know that my child is in trouble and there's a bear behind them? Like, can I reach out to them? How does this work? What about like who is going to be with them? Do they have an identified counselor? Is it a rotating shift? Is there one person that's going to be in their little cabin? Little camp counselor, right? What needs to occur during the drop off for you to feel comfortable? Now, Donnell, me and you, we're not feeling comfortable with that drop off, right? Me, you, and Carla, we're not doing that, right? But maybe somebody else feels a little more comfortable.
I'm not doing it either, but in a perfect world, can the parents tour the camp where the kids are going to be?
Right.
Are they in like age groups? Do they get split up? Can the siblings be together?
Right. I want to see this facility. I want to make sure that, you know, it's all nice and shiny on the outside, and then you like go around the back and all of a sudden like it's Freddy Krueger's playground. Like I'm not with that. Like I need to see that.
And not even just the facility. Like I want to meet the people that my children are going to be around for the next week. Like
interview them.
I want to interview them, but you know, people give off vibes.
Yeah.
People give off vibes. So
all of us in child welfare want to go and do a home study, right? Like
just be like packing my kids back up in the car and be like, nope, sorry, can't.
Like I know we paid for this already, but we got to go. We need a refund, right? Those are some of the things that we're thinking about. And then what about what would your children need to feel comfortable and safe? Would they need Mr. Snuggly, right? Maybe they can't go to bed without their stuffed animal. Maybe they need a night light. Maybe you have like some of those particular kids who, you know, they need the door ajar at a 45-degree angle in order to feel safe, right? Like I used to live in Hawaii, so we could not have our beds facing the window because the Menehune would come in and get us and like take us away, right? Like that's a thing culturally, right? We need to understand these things, right? So those are some of the things that we're thinking of.
My son would definitely need a nightlight and he would be completely fine. He loves people and has no problem meeting new people. It's me who's the psycho about it. So
we are definitely twin flames. My daughter is also the same way. She does not know any strangers. Me, however, I'm freaking out about everybody. Don't talk to them. They're weird. They're strangers, right? Very good. Thank you. So thinking about this, thinking about our children and all the concerns that we have and all the things that we're thinking about as it relates to our child leaving us, what about kids who are entering foster care, right? Because we're talking about just like 3 sets of kids. We're talking about a 13-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 7-year-old. Like for the most part, they can talk, they can move around, they can ambulate on their own. They're able to maybe start self-protection a little bit, right? They're able to like express their needs for food. And if they have any sort of identified needs, like they need a Band-Aid or something, they can say that, right? But what about when we have our children in foster care and they're going from one caregiver who knows all these things, knows they need Mr. Snuggly, knows they need the nightlight on, and they're going to the next caregiver's home. And that next caregiver is like, these are brand new kids. I don't know what this is. And they're feeling the same way too. As the case managers in the situation and supervisors in the situation, these are some of the things that we need to start thinking about like in our own way. And we do that, but maybe we're not as focused on it, but we need to start being that way. We need to start thinking about the end game for our kids. So with the Florida Transition Assessment Guide, it really helps us to kind of understand and interpret really the trauma that is associated with it, and then how we can reduce the trauma and the emotional harm for the children as they're transitioning from one residence to another. We know that transition occurs when a child is moved from one caregiver to another, whether it's planned or not, whether we have those emergency placements or those planned ones, right? And so when we're talking about the planned ones, we're talking about all of those from one caregiver to another caregiver. It's not necessarily including the reunification transition, but they can include reunification, permanency, right? If they're going to a pre-adoptive home, or if we just have a placement disruption. Right, so we can use this assessment guide that we've been provided to use when there's already an affirmative decision that a placement is going to occur. We know that it's going to happen, so how can we use this transition guide to help us minimize the fear, minimize the concerns, the anxieties that surround the transition or the movement from one placement to the next, right? Do they need Mr. Snuggly? Do they need their nightlight, right? Taking into consideration all of these things prior to these kids moving and going to their next placement. So the importance of an effective transition plan We know that poorly executed or improperly timed transitions have negative effects on our children, right? Especially as it relates to their attachment to others. Just like in the video with Gru and the kids, that can cause damage to not only their bond, they do get back together later on. Spoiler alert, in case y'all haven't seen the movie and wanted to check it out, they do get back together later on, but that could cause a damage with them later on down the line. It can also change the way that a child approaches another caregiver, how they form attachments, because now maybe they're untrusting of the caregiver because they feel like, well, if I do one more thing or if I do something, then they're just going to give up on me and just throw me away. They're going to kick me out, right? So how do they form those attachments? The number of placements can impact their daily functioning and adjustments, right? We want to seek to minimize how many times we're having children transition in and out of homes. We recognize that unfortunately placement disruptions occur, but what can we do as the child welfare agency to really minimize that? We need to start thinking about those individual needs. We need to start thinking about conditions for return. We need to start thinking about family finding and how we can find them some stability, right? And we know that poor transitions can interfere with that child's relationships, not only with their caregivers or with the adults in their lives, but also maybe their siblings, if they're leaving one sibling or if they're moving from one house where the sibling was and they're going somewhere else, if they are in a, geographically, if they're in a different place, if they're in a different county, maybe, then they have new schools, then they have new social groups, they've got to make new friends. What kind of an impact is that move, that those frequent transitions causing on that child? What kind of emotional stress or distress is that causing them? Are they able to have proper goodbyes? So like you guys were saying earlier, if they had spent maybe a little more time, if that case manager had spent a little more time with the children in that home, then maybe that would have helped to ease that transition, that maybe it wouldn't have been so traumatic, it wouldn't have been so emotionally charged, right? We had enough time to really kind of figure it out, say our goodbyes, process that grief and that separation, maybe come up with a plan about how they'll maintain contact, and maybe that will help prepare that child for that transition. So really kind of taking these things into consideration when they're getting ready to move to their next foster home or their next placement. What are standard expectations of an effective transition plan? So we know with SB 80, we started, and it didn't just start with SB 80, but now as a requirement, we've been doing the QPI, the Quality Parenting Initiative, for a while. And part of that, we start doing the comfort calls, which are some of the things that foster parents have been doing anyway, and caregivers have been doing anyway, but trying to make this sort of unique or uniformed across the board, right? So when they have those placement changes, especially those initial placement changes, or when they're first brought into care, having that comfort call with the bio parent and the child's new caregiver, having them have that building of a bridge, so that, okay, now I know where my child is, I feel comfortable that, okay, my child is with a person, because for most people, foster care is such an abstract concept. Going to a foster placement is an abstract concept. We have a lot of foster parents who are very, who may not necessarily have comfort with that parent or that bio parent having ongoing access to them or having their phone numbers, but we can facilitate that. We can use our company phones and we can call while we're at the home and have them speak to the bio parent. Maybe they can write a letter, maybe they can give them the information, maybe stuff that we don't know. Maybe we have this child in the new foster home and they are screaming all night and can't figure out why. And they are really upset and can't figure out how to get this child to sleep. They've been doing everything known to mankind. Maybe they got colic. No, maybe they just need the nightlight on, or maybe you have to play the radio, or maybe they can't go to sleep unless they're listening to country music, right? My godson is like that. I'm like, why the country station, right? All night long, got to hear it. But having that information, I wouldn't have known that had I not heard from his mom that, oh, you got to play that. So like, I got to go find some country music. I don't know where to find that. They play that on the internet, like, is that on Amazon? right? Making sure that we're having those, that communication, making sure that's being disseminated. Then doing those icebreaker calls or those icebreaker meetings, excuse me, where maybe they are able to have that face-to-face contact, right? Facilitating that between our birth parents and our caregivers, maybe having them show up to a visit, not necessarily coming to their home, but maybe showing up to a visit at the park and having that face-to-face contact where now we are attaching a face and a name to a voice and having that full picture. That can help ease that transition. That can help to kind of be like, oh, okay. They're not the killer. They're a good person who wants to care for our children and who loves our children and is willing to help us out and do what needs to be done in order for me to continue my bond with my kids. So in thinking about it, how do comfort calls and icebreaker meetings support children who are experiencing a transition? Kind of just talked about it, right? What are some other ideas that that you guys might have? How does that support their transition?
Hey, Shanika.
Yes, ma'am.
Hey, I was just going to say, I think you made some really great comments earlier about trying to look at the perspective and like utilizing our own views as parents of what we would do. Because at one time, I didn't realize it. And, when you move a child, children, we can actually create some of the trauma. I remember a child actually being scared because I was moving them from one placement to another, that their parents would not be able to find them.
Yeah.
That they would not, their parents would not know how to reunify with them any longer, not understand, how to find them. And it was as simple as saying, when we get to the new foster parents' house, I'll let you call your mom and you can tell them you've moved locations and like, this is what's going on. And, this is what this is. And also making us realize what a great burden we have of putting the parents at ease. Imagine just moving, like if someone were, first of all, it'd be traumatizing just to remove my child, but then I've met one foster parent. Let's say I met that foster parent at a visit, but then I get to a next visit and I find out you moved my child and never even told me you moved my child.
Right.
And my child goes, yeah, now I live at so-and-so place and da-da-da-da, and you can't have any information. Imagine the fear and like the trauma we even create with the parent, because now it's like, okay, I already was trying to deal with the first placement. Now you're telling me you've changed their placement. You've given me no information. I was given no input, no nothing.
Right. And I think for so many of us, when we've been in the field and we have our caseloads and they're very demanding and we're just trying to get this kid to the next placement. They've got to go to that next placement and we've got to clock out because we're near our 40 hours, right? But we take out and we stop thinking about like the humanity of it all. Like we're in the business of helping people. We're in the business of connecting with people. The things that we do have ongoing ramifications in their lives. It can literally change the trajectory of their lives, right? So we have to be mindful of that. It's not just one more thing for us to do. If we are taking it and keeping it as a humanistic perspective when we're thinking about our own kids and the things that can happen, like you said, if we're dealing with, okay, they're with Miss Susan and Miss Susan is really cool and she's committed to that. Now you're telling me they're not even in the same county. What do you mean they're out of circuit? What do you mean they're living in Alachua? Like, I don't even live near Alachua. I can't even spell Alachua, right? Like that is a hard thing for us to understand because now that fear and that anxiety of the unknown has now set in again. Then not to mention think about the relationship that it has with us as the workers. Now they don't trust us. Oh, what do you mean they've been there for 3 weeks? No one told me, no one called me, right? So we have to think about that when we're working with our families. These comfort calls, these icebreaker meetings, they are more than just another thing to do. I get that we're really busy, but we really have to focus and like bring back our attention for the reason that we joined this field, that we came into this field, which was to help people, and causing them additional unwarranted, undue trauma by just not keeping us human focused really causes additional harm, and we shouldn't do that, right? Thank you. Okay. So what should be included in the or who should be included, excuse me, who should be included in the development of a transition plan? Well, of course, we want to make sure that we are including everybody in our family's team, right? So that's any service providers, that's anybody who's working with the children on a day-to-day basis, maybe their current caregiver, their proposed caregivers, like the new caregivers, any mental health professionals, guidance counselors, if they're particularly close with the guidance counselor at school, any teachers, maybe any mentors, big brothers, maybe, you know, any relative supports, anyone who has had that ongoing contact. We need to bring them in. They are going to be part of that family team, right? They are going to be crucial in us developing and implementing that transition plan that's going to minimize that trauma, right? Maybe we need to take into consideration that they have football season, if they're almost done with football, and maybe if we can wait a couple weeks, then maybe, you know, that would help that child transition because they finished the season. They're the star quarterback. The scouts are looking at them. If they don't finish the season, then that's going to cause harm for the rest of their life, maybe getting into college, right? So we got to take into consideration that. And we won't know all that information or think about those different pieces if we're not talking to everybody in that family team, okay? Sorry, changed the stuff too quickly. So cooperation and sharing of information, right? We want to make sure that we're getting everybody involved. Respect for the child's developmental stages and psychological needs, right? We want to understand that some children, depending on their attachment styles or the stuff that they have already gone through, the trauma that they've already endured, maybe they need to have a slower transition. Maybe that 3 weekends is not going to be sufficient for them. Maybe they need a longer time, right? Maybe that transitional, the gradual transition needs to happen a little slower. Maybe we need to consider that. And then the continued contact with the caregiver. Sometimes they feel like they leave one caregiver and they go to another caregiver. What happens? That person's now dead to us, right? Because we no longer have any contact with them. But do they have to be? Is that caregiver willing to maintain contact with our children? A lot of times foster parents want to remain a part of that child's life. We need to ask them what their comfort is so that they can continue being a part of that child's family team. And then what should be considered when we're talking about transition plans? We want to talk about the age and developmental status and any unique specialized needs, especially when we're talking about school-age children. If we move them from one school where they're receiving services, if we move them to a different school, does that school also have those services to meet those needs? What about the child's mental health status? If they're currently working with a therapist, would that new placement change cause a disruption in services? Would they have to now no longer go to that therapist or go to that counselor, or would it cause a delay in receiving any sort of help, right? Because maybe now they have to go to a different provider and there's a wait list there, right? Maybe that's something that we need to take in consideration. Not to mention the length of time that a child was in that residence, right? And whether or not they're able to build and maintain relationships with those parents or caregivers. And then preparing the family prior to the transition plan. Not just showing up like, all right, kid, get your stuff, get in the car. I'm on call tonight. We got to hurry up and get back in county, right? Having the opportunity to talk to them and really have everyone understand this is the plan, we've all agreed. Even in situations when I was a dependency specialist and we staffed cases for permanency, and we did like our family finding meetings as well, it is not necessarily that everybody has to agree or feels the same way, but can we agree to disagree? What can we come up with to help ease the transition? Because we know that transition is coming, it's inevitable. What can we do to minimize the pain and the trauma that might be associated with it? And then how can children be an active part? Now we know that children are active participants inside of our cases. They should be including in our ongoing case planning process. They should also be included in their own transitions, right? They have a say, they have a voice, specifically for our older teens, the ones who are getting ready to age out of foster care, or they're going to be moving out of foster care. They need to have a voice in their future, what's going to happen, their plan. They need to understand the reason for their moves, help them work through what they're feeling. Like maybe even though they know that they want to go to a forever home and they're going to move into a pre-adoptive feeling, they're now bonded with this caregiver and they're having maybe some cognitive dissonance about it. Like on one hand, they want to move and be a part of a forever home, but maybe on the other hand, they're really going to miss that caregiver. What can we do as the agency to help minimize that? Well, maybe they can still continue to be a part of that child's life. Maybe they can still come over and hang out with that caregiver, right? Help work them through that. Give them the opportunity to say goodbye to their caregivers, their friends, go to school and have that final moment. Like my daughter is going to middle school and she just vehemently believes that this is the last time she's going to see some of her friends. I'm like, look, girl, they're not moving. Like y'all are all gonna still be together. You'll eventually go to the same high school, right? But it was such a big thing that last day of school, they were crying. I'm like, y'all are 10, like this is too much, right? If you know my child, you know my child. But giving them that opportunity, because at those ages, like their friend groups are really their primary attachments. They are more connected with them than they are to even their family members a lot of time. So to have them being ripped away from them really can be traumatic. And then help them with maintaining relationships. What can we do? Do they have each other? I'm sure they do, but do they have each other's numbers? Do they have each other's email address, their IG, their Snapchat? Do they have that stuff? And then even allowing that child to participate in packing their belongings, right? Sometimes there's nothing worse than having someone rummaging through your things, packing up your stuff and being like, here you go. Okay, well, did you get all of this stuff? Did you get this? Right? Allowing them to do that so that it doesn't feel like they're being necessarily put out, that they are part of a transition so that they are able to do that, right? So what are some examples of actions you've taken to involve children in transition planning? What barriers have you faced? How have you been able to resolve them? How did involving the children make a difference? Did it make a difference?
Well, in adoptions, when we move kids, we do, like a slow transition, and they do visits, day visits and overnight visits and weekend visits. So they're very involved, obviously, in the transition.
Okay. And do you feel like that has been beneficial when they're more involved?
Yes, and I feel like sometimes, it's not ideal, but the transition gets rushed, like if they have to be out of their current placement. And I feel like those placements don't usually last when they have to just go there, and they don't get to, bond with the family and that kind of stuff. Obviously, in dependency, it's more difficult to do that, but.
Right.
Yeah, and also in adoptions, when it comes to recruiting for children, like we, depending on the age of the child, we let those children have some input on the families that we are interviewing and what they feel would be a better family for them, before we make any decisions on matching a child to a specific family. So that also helps with the transition.
And a lot of kids, like, they have like this idea of the family that they want to be involved in too, or like who they want, or like what their idea of their family looks like. It's not necessarily like the traditional like mom, dad, and like white picket fence. Like I had one child and we were doing a staffing and they were getting ready to go into adoption, and they just wanted like an upstairs and downstairs house. And we were like, well, well, I mean, we'll see what we can do, but I mean, we don't have houses in the back, but right, like those are some of those things that they didn't care about anything else. They wanted that, and then if they had a dog, that would be cool, right? So involving them in that and having those conversations and understanding their wishes, that, you know, it leads to more easier transitions or even stable placements moving forward. Thank you, guys. So how can current caregivers be an active supportive part of developing a transition plan, right? We're going to discuss why that transition is necessary. We know that this can be an emotional time, especially for a lot of our foster parents. Maybe if they were looking to adopt and maybe we've located a relative or a mutual foster home for that child and their siblings, right? So they're going to experience that grief that comes with that loss, right? Almost like they have like a death in the family, right? So we should take that into consideration, help them to understand and kind of like refocus, like we're doing this for the child. They should be encouraged to participate in that transition plan and developing the transition plan, how best to go about doing it and implementing it. Plan how it's going to occur. Maybe it'll be less traumatic if we pick them up from daycare, or if the caregiver is somehow involved in maybe driving the child there and just hanging out there and like seeing their room or seeing their living situation. Have ongoing communication with the child about how visits are going, especially when doing those overnight visits or even the ongoing visits, right? When we're doing those private interviews every single time that we are in the home or every single time that we have contact with that child, talking to them about what's going on in the home, how they feel, how they are interacting with their caregivers, what their relationship is like. And then discuss how the impact of children remaining in the home, right? That might have an impact on some of the other kids. Or if one child is moving out of the home to go, maybe they were with grandma and now one child who has a different father is now going to live with that father. What's going to be the impact of that? How can we help to continue maintaining those bonds and those relationships and those connections, but also help to ease that transition so it doesn't feel like one sibling is being ripped away? How can we continue that ongoing contact? And then, unless it is contrary to the child's best interest, having that former caregiver remain a part of that child's life. How can new caregivers be supportive to provide excellent parenting? Well, we want to make sure that they have the information that they need, right? They should be able to have as much when it's possible, of course, right? When we have those planned transitions, particularly, when it's possible, give them as much information about the child, just like with those match staffings, when we're kind of doing like that full disclosure and it's like, okay, this is what we know about the child. To the best of our ability, we should be able to communicate what the child's specific needs are. You're the child's case manager. It's very likely that you've worked this case for a while. Maybe you have a really good rapport. You can give them that information. The caregivers are going to need specific things about what's going to be helpful, what providers they see, what pediatricians they see, if they go to, if they receive mental health counseling, who their therapist is, when they see them, where they get their medication management from, right? All those things are part of the things that we have to do when we are helping to support the caregivers and their ability to parent the children. And then determine any ongoing connections that the child might need, okay? And developing individualized specific transition plans. So we know that we're not doing cookie cutter anything, we just cannot, right? We have to consider the length of time that it takes to transition a child properly, the number, the frequency of those transition contacts. Is 3 contacts going to be sufficient for that child? Maybe they need more. Maybe that child is gung-ho and ready to go tomorrow. It's like, all right, I'm gonna see y'all, right? Some kids are like that. Maybe they don't need a longer transition. Maybe the shorter transition is just fine for them, but we have to tailor that transition to their individual needs, right? That's going to require us to do ongoing assessing of that child and that child's needs. And what factors need to be considered to develop a planful transition? So when we're talking about those planful transitions, we're talking about specifically as it relates to that child, right? There should be a minimum of at least one pre-transition visit if possible. And those transitions should occur over time. It should be a gradual transition that happens over time. And is there any flexibility to modify that transition if we establish, okay, we're gonna try to do the 3, and maybe that child needs some more time to get accustomed to the idea of transitioning? Are we able to modify that? Or is it ironclad, like we have a court order to do so? Or do we have discretion? And then what factors need to be considered to develop a planful transition? Is the transition child specific, right? We know that it's important to make sure that we're not moving children when we can help it prematurely. If they're not yet ready to go, if they've only had maybe that one pre-transition visit, or maybe they've had none, is that going to interfere with their transition? Is that going to cause some harm, right? Are all the parties who are involved, are they fully informed about what the transition plan is? Do they understand what the transition is? Do they understand how it's going to look? Is that case manager doing ongoing communication with all the parties? We're talking about it, we're getting their input, we're making assessments based on it. And has the ongoing contact been created between that child and the former caregiver? What does that look like? And then, of course, we all know our infamous saying, if it's not in FSFN, it didn't happen, right? We have to document all of our efforts in FSFN to ensure that we are documenting our efforts to have these transitions, what it looks like. We need to document our transition activities, that we're having that pre-transition visit, that we are having their meeting with that new caregiver, that the new caregiver and the old caregiver have had their comfort calls. We should be documenting this stuff. And of course, based on the agency, we might have different protocols, but you as the case manager, ultimately that falls on you to ensure that these things are taking place and that it's happening. And so activity C, I'm not going to do activity C as it relates to the Franklin family, but I'm going to take a minute to really show you the transition assessment guide. So I'm going to stop sharing this for a second so that I can see it. Okay, can everybody see my my screen? Okay, so you guys received this as part of your in the email that was attached to your Outlook. So you guys have this transition guide. Understand that even though we're not going to go over it step by step, we did cover it inside of the PowerPoint. Okay. Everything that's on here is in here. This is yours. You can have it. You can go back and reference it if you need it. There is the sibling assessment, sibling placement assessment guide to help us understand that. You guys see that still? It changed, right? Yeah, okay, just making sure. All right. This is essentially all, this was on the PowerPoint that we covered. Literally, we took it off here and put it inside of the PowerPoint. So all that information is available to you. And then this is the new form that we are required to fill out for all of our kids. So now remember, I said that it's 5 pages, right? And that seems like a lot, especially because we're busy. We got a lot of kids, and these are required for each and every child that is in out-of-home care on your caseload. So you're gonna have to go back and do them for each of our kids, right? But just be aware that only some of the information is going to change. These first couple pages, most of that is demographic information about our kids. It's not going to change. Their names, their date of birth, their FSFN IDs, that stuff isn't going to change. Maybe the number of placements is going to be updated. Case manager name, okay, that might change. The reason for the placement change, yes, that's going to change. Whether or not they need a CPA still, if they do, then that has to be attached. the child's information, most of that stuff is going to stay the same unless it is going to change, right? Or unless it has changed, then we need to update that. Any medications that they might have, their allergies, maybe they've got new allergies, like with my child, every time I turn around, she's picking up a new allergy. Their educational settings, if they're in the schools, if they have IEP, special accommodations, these are things that we're going to, most of us are going to do them maybe once, maybe change it as they progress from middle school to high school or elementary to middle school. But for the most part, they're going to stay pretty much the same. What the child likes, any additional information about that child. Their developmental plan, or their developmental milestones, excuse me. Ongoing contact with the caregiver. Of course, this is part of the transition plan. That is something that's going to happen possibly inside of that NDT staffing that you're going to have. What is the plan to maintain the contact with the new caregiver? Or is there going to be opportunities for that caregiver to reach out to the new caregiver? Any significant events in the life of the child that need to be considered when we're getting ready to move that child? Is that child age and developmentally appropriate and able to pack their own belongings? Are they included in that? Will the placement change result in sibling separation? So that's stuff that we're going to have to think about as we're transitioning, or they're getting ready, or we're preparing for a transition. And then visitation with their parent or siblings. If we don't have something like that already in place, that might be now something that we need to consider. So we have to use this form. This is also going to be, it has to be filled out in entirety, and it has to be updated or uploaded into our FISFIN file cabinets. Okay. Any questions about the transition plan? Any questions about any of the documents that we have gone over? Any questions about ongoing sibling assessment and planful transitions? No? Okay. Well, that concludes our training for today. I appreciate you guys. You guys have been great. Thank you for helping me train it today, because I need you guys just as much as you need me to train this. So I appreciate you guys, and I appreciate you guys being interactive. Have a great rest of your afternoon. Enjoy your day. I'll see you guys later. Bye. You're very welcome, Jacob.